Okay, good evening or good morning or good afternoon, wherever you are. A lot going on in the news. We've got the G20 summit in Rome and we have the GOP climate summit taking place in Glasgow. As things are going on, we've got the build up to the Glasgow summit. In Rome, a major development has taken place where world leaders of the 20 wealthiest industrialized countries in the world have set a corporate tax rate of 15%. Major news that's breaking out of Rome. Alongside that, there is a fishing dispute, which is backdrop to the UK leaving the European Union between France and the UK in the Channel over territorial waters and quotas and what fishermen are allowed to to catch where they're allowed to fish. That is a backdrop alongside this G20 summit. Obviously, the COVID pandemic uh, is a backdrop to this as well. Um, so all really interesting stuff. Also, Squid Game has become very popular on Netflix, and certain high schools in the US have banned um, the outfits for Halloween. That's interesting. It's become a cultural phenomenon. Um, if you looked at the main channel, I didn't cover any of the rugby matches today because both matches were on Amazon Prime. Amazon has secured the rights to 17 of the 20 um, Autumn International Rugby Union tests. I'm not in favour of that, personally. That means only 3 tests are on live, free-to-air terrestrial TV in the UK. That's a first. And from next year, I think all of them end up going off free-to-air onto Amazon. And not all parties are happy with that decision. And it'll be interesting to see what the viewership figures are like. It'd be very interesting what the viewership figures are like because not everyone is an Amazon Prime customer, and not everyone actually uses Amazon in the UK. So that's very interesting. And TV rights are quite interesting in regards to licensing and TV license. Obviously, we had the UK budget, so for the next tax year, taxes are going to rise. A good way to look at that. Taxes are going to rise. Council tax is going to rise. So if you're a British citizen and you live in the UK, you're going to see a tax hike. You may also see a pay rise as well for the lowest paid. So the minimum wage is going up. It's a living wage kind of concept that we have. But yeah, there's lots at stake, so to speak. Lots at play, lots at stake. So it'll be very interesting to see how that all plays out. Very interesting. Um, but yeah, most of the major stories are of the political kind. The ongoing, as I say, the ongoing fishing rights row between France and the UK. It's not the first time we've seen an international waters disagreement over fishing rights and exploration rights for natural resources and research and claiming of territory. It won't be the last. We had this in the 70s called the Cod Wars between Iceland and the UK over fishing rights in the North Atlantic. We've seen it with, resource rights as well, where there's claims to territory. So the Falklands, for example, between the UK and Argentina. The Antarctic is subdivided into zones, and Antarctic waters are divided for research purposes. So that's very interesting. But yeah, all told, a lot going on. Obviously, the Queen's not been very well, so if you follow the royal family news, that's something that is on the agenda at the moment. Queen Elizabeth II has been in and out of hospital and is told to rest for the next 2 weeks. We don't know exactly what's going on, but she is nearing 100, so she is getting on in years. She's not as young as she used to be, and obviously Prince Philip passed away just after Easter this year. So we may see more duties being taken on by other members of the royal family in regards to royal duties. Um, it'll be interesting to see how if she decides to abdicate in favour of Charles or William at some point, or if she decides to stay on until she passes away. And very, very interesting times. The Prince Andrew case is now getting interesting. He was subpoenaed for court documents by the US court, the civil case. His lawyers are trying to get the case thrown out of American court, so that's interesting. In regards to the summit in Rome, excuse me, bit of gag throat there. Smoker's cough. So in regards to what is happening with the G20, they have approved a proposal that sets the minimum tax rate of 15% on big business. This is something that has been in the backdrop and in discussion for some time. And then, of course, you've got the climate summit in Glasgow, which follows immediately after, with 26 nations involved. But yes, it's a provisional agreement that sets large business to be taxed at 15%. They're trying to target these offshore tax havens. We've seen lots of leaks, like the Panama Papers and the Pandora Papers leaks of super wealthy companies and individuals hiding their tax status and their money, which has cost, well, not billions, but trillions of US dollars in tax revenue for not just developed economies, but developing economies. All 20 nations have agreed to this drive to set corporate tax rates of 15%. Two leaders aren't present. It's Vladimir Putin and China's Xi Jinping. They're appearing by video links, so technically they are still present. There will still be government officials there. This tax deal was proposed by the US earlier this year under the Joe Biden administration, and it should be officially adopted by Sunday, and it should be enforced by 2023. So it's still 2 years out before any enforcement comes into place. So it will be interesting to see what individual states do. I think it's going to be a minimum of 15%. And of course, Ireland is an interesting country because it has very, very relaxed, in the sense of it has a lower corporate tax rate than the rest of the EU and the rest of the G20, which in itself has led companies like Google and Amazon to have head offices in Dublin and avoid higher tax rates for corporation tax elsewhere in the world. Even though Google is a US company, it decides to put its headquarters in Dublin, for tax purposes. President Biden has released in a statement here at the G20, leaders representing the 80% of the world's GDP, allies and competitors alike made clear that their support for a strong global minimum tax. This is more than just a tax deal, it's diplomacy reshaping our global economy and delivering for our people. Obviously, you've got the COP26 summit, which is basically a follow-up to the Paris Agreement that obviously President Trump pulled out of. There are still huge divisions within various governments in that case. The Italian Prime Minister Mario Draghi opened the 2-day summit of the G20 with a message of unification, telling world leaders that going alone is simply not an option, and he's encouraging all members to work together. Talking about climate emissions, the Prime Minister Boris Johnson, yes, well, he's a bit of a calamity, really. There's a draft communique into trying to limit temperature rises and carbon emissions. Climate change is a natural phenomenon that has been exacerbated by man over the last 250 years, so that'll be interesting. They need to mobilise finances annually, about $100 billion annually, dollars from public and private sources through to 2025 to address the needs of developing countries so they can tackle changes to climate. But this is a promise that has obviously failed since 2009. So the G20, the G8, now the G7 have been failing for over a decade in this case. There's also discussions in regards to the Iranian nuclear program. Uh, Obviously, Iran is not part of the talks of the G20. The nation said that if Iran continues nuclear advances, this would jeopardize the possibility of returning to the 2015 nuclear deal that the Obama administration brought in the last year of Obama's presidency. And of course, Trump brought back the sanctions. So that's interesting geopolitically in the region. Obviously, Donald Trump pulled out of the deal in 2018, reinstating harsh sanctions against Iran. Since then, Iran has increased its nuclear activities, violating much of the multinational pact that took many years to put in place. Talks are due to restart in November. Then, of course, you've got the climate summit. So that's really interesting. 130 nations have signed up to this 15% global tax rate as well. So that's really interesting. Obviously, the volcano in Spain is continuously erupting. The volcano in Iceland is simmering away. No fresh lava flows, but is still technically classed as active, although out of a lesser threat than what it was before. It's only yellow threat level at the moment, but I've just watched the live stream from Iceland. It's still steaming away. There's still gases coming out of it. It's just not blowing up at the moment. The nation of Tonga has recorded its first case of coronavirus. It's taken nearly 2 years for Tonga to be hit by COVID. That's interesting, and a very small nation with a very poor healthcare system that isn't as developed as neighbouring nations. That could be devastating for a nation like Tonga should that get out of hand. There's obviously been flooding in northern England, southern Scotland, and Wales with heavy rain. Tail end of a hurricane came up here. We had some rain down here in the south of England where I live. Not as heavy, but the wind was there. There was a suspicious package at Stansted Airport that led to the airport being closed for a brief period and disruption. There's a couple of other bits and pieces. Toxic trolling of India's cricket stars, T20 World Cup. I know it's a sports video, but there is obviously issues against social media and personal and vitriolic attacks against sports stars. Obviously, they lost a key match to Pakistan in the T20 World Cup, which was the first time since 1992 or 1990. And a lot of Indian fans passionately vented their frustration on social media. They were targeting a Muslim player because India is a multi-religion, multi-ethnic country. He's the only player in 50-man squad who was a Muslim, and he took the brunt of the vitriolic abuse. Obviously, former cricketers like Sehwag and Tendulkar have come out and supported their former teammate. And the ICB, the Indian Cricket Board, have showed their support for him. And of course, the team has stayed pretty quiet. Kohli, the captain's wife, has been heavily abused on social media. She has been in the past. There's a lot going on within the politics of India. It's not particularly pleasant. There's a Hindu nationalist party in charge. There's a lot going on. A notorious prisoner has been denied parole for the 10th time. Sidney Cook. He's a notorious sex offender. He was jailed for life in '99. He'd been jailed in '89 for the manslaughter of a teenager. He was released. He was released early after reducing his sentence. He was given 2 life sentences after missing for historic abuse in the 70s. He's 10 attempts at parole refused. That's ridiculous. I've never ever come across anything like that where someone's been rejected for parole 10 times. That is exceptionally interesting. Apparently, he's still too dangerous to release. He's 94. I mean, the guy's probably senile at this point. It's probably just his lawyers trying to get him out on early on compassionate grounds because he's about to die. Um, the Pokemon Go makers are working with Nintendo again, so that's really interesting. Wales are getting battered by New Zealand. Good, good, good to see. Crystal Palace beat Man City. Oh dear, 2-0. Dear, 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 dear. Um, And Wilfried Zaha is the first Palace player to score 50 top flight goals. That is interesting. Scotland thumped Tonga. Liverpool drew with Brighton. So there's been some interesting things on in the sports front. But no, the on the background of the G20, obviously there's the fishing row between France and the UK. Uh, Boris Johnson, the UK Prime Minister, who's a bit of a clown, best way to describe him. He has acknowledged there is turbulence between our relationship with our closest neighbour in Europe, France. Um, French boats have been denied post-Brexit fishing licences for UK and Channel Island waters. Um, and then a British ship was interned by the French authorities. It goes back and forth. It's tit for tat, really. It does nothing. Um, and Yeah, it's all to do with fishing permits and we've been here before, um, so that'd be really interesting. But there's not really much happening in the news. We've got obviously this international summit, and it will be interesting to see what other discussions take place. Obviously, the Iranian situation, the global corporate tax rate is exceptionally interesting. So I'll be when people do start posting comments in the question section, in the chat section. It'll be interesting to see what their views are from around the world. Um, but it's very interesting that the current U.S. administration, obviously there's been a backlash against big multinational companies for hiding their profits and their taxes overseas, whilst not paying their staff decent wages. There's ongoing strikes in the US at places like Kellogg's at the moment, and Heinz, Kraft. They've been ongoing for some time. And I always say this in regards to North American viewers on both channels is we obviously have a strong social care system, and well, strong enshrined in law with taxpayer funded education and health systems, which the US doesn't have. Even Canada has a state healthcare system and cheaper medication. Um, Social security systems over here in Europe, partly as a result of both world wars, but also social movements in the lead up to the First World War, with like trade unionism, workers' rights, um, enshrining in law a minimum time for holiday. Even on 0 hours contracts, you're entitled to, I think, 20 days minimum holiday paid. Um, yeah, the US doesn't have that. They have certain days where you know you get your time off. But the poorer you are, the less likely you are to get time off work. Some, and so there's we get things called bank holidays or national holidays, where vast sections of the economy basically shut down or have reduced working hours. Transport, retail, um, special sporting occasions are put on. Um, it's sort of it's something born out of the trade union movement, something born out again, yeah, of the conflicts in Europe in the build up to 1945 and post 1945. Um, and a lot of them, especially Americans, when they come over to Europe on holiday or on business, are very, very surprised that our health systems are paid for by the taxpayer. And that, we do have private healthcare as well, um, but it works alongside state healthcare. So that's really interesting, and yeah, and a lot of it is to do with well, the tax systems that we have in place. It's while there are issues with tax avoidance and tax evasion globally, and the super wealthy, trying to put their money offshore, which is totally legal. There's nothing illegal about that. Um, it's when they're trying to evade taxes when it comes to residency and VAT on purchases. And it's a very interesting and complex subject. In order for this proposal over the next couple of years to become law across the world, 130 odd nations have signed up to it. A lot of countries are going to have to reform their tax systems. And because they've been allowed to become so overly complex over many, many years, um, it it will take a lot of reform, and there needs to be a lot of political will to do that reform. If you sign up to an international agreement, you have to fulfil it. The, the issue is always that some nations lag behind. You know, private industry will lobby national governments and opposition parties in order to get favourable legislation or delays or amendments to legislation. That's something that needs to be looked at as well as the power of lobbyists. And this is something else that the US needs to start looking at is the power of lobbyists within US politics, US business, and the links between big business and those big businesses that get government contracts and politicians. It's something that is on the agenda and has been on the agenda for quite some time. And the average citizen is getting more and more disgruntled, I think is a good word for how they feel in regards to the effects of lobbying, how certain industries get exemptions or amendments made to financial legislation or regulation legislation. Well, I do think over legislating and excess red tape needs to be looked at, and there needs to be reform when it comes to regulation and red tape and bureaucracy, and it can obviously affect the viability of certain industries. I don't believe in weak regulation. I believe in fair regulation, and this is an ongoing debate with the European Union. One of the reasons that has obviously led to the UK leaving and other countries having very strong skeptical parties or pro-leaving parties from the EU is the regulation side of things, where what was a trading bloc has become very politicized. There's a lot of excessive layers of regulation and bureaucracy. There's a lot of wastage, um, and while you know I honestly believe that if we had stayed in, we could have pushed for reform internally. I have concerns, and I'm pragmatic when it comes to this. The euro currency is a political currency, not an economic currency. It only benefits Germany and the Scandinavian countries, really, if we're being honest, because their economies are set up in a way that could work with the euro as a single currency. It doesn't benefit um, the southern European nations. It doesn't benefit France. It doesn't really benefit Spain and Portugal. It it basically benefits the German economy because it was set at what was the German Deutschmark at the time on the exchange rate, um, which is a very flawed system. And the German economy is completely different in the way it's set up and structured to the Greek economy, for example, which is very heavily on the service industry um, and agriculture. The German economy has engineering at its core and transportation, high-end manufacturing, um, financial services. Um, there's different unemployment rates, different average salaries, you know, completely different. And so a political currency like that is doomed to have fail basically. Monetary unions have been in place before. Normally, when the, the minor economy in the partnership has a fluctuating currency that wildly fluctuates, there's a lot of speculation. And the stronger economy, the stronger nation economically, um, obviously has a very healthy, trading relationship, close links with the weaker nation economically. It benefits both to have stable economies in both because of trade. And I just think the euro is doomed to fail eventually. We are one crisis away from another financial bailout for the weaker nations. They've been hammered over the last decade. Banks have gone bust. People have lost their savings. People have lost their homes. Pensioners and the vulnerable have had their benefits drastically reduced and slipping into poverty. And it has affected investment. It has affected productivity, employment levels. So the euro as a currency it's not all good. I didn't actually get to watch the games because they were on Amazon, and I don't have Amazon Prime. I only found out about that today. That 17 out of the 20 rugby union internationals in the autumn are on Amazon. Only 3 in the UK are on free to air, which is really frustrating as a sports fan. That again, I've got to pay for. I've got to pay to get international sport. Club sport I can understand to a point, but I do believe in a fair balance between subscription services and free to air services. And there's a reason why younger people below the age of 40 are turning away from mainstream media, and they're finding ways to illegally access content on the internet, and illegal live streams for sporting events or film, TV series. And now we've seen with things like Netflix, they're becoming more mainstream in the sense that now they are becoming the mainstream media. Well, actually, on one of my because I do waste collection, residential waste collection, so garbage collector you would call it. One of my rounds that I'm on at the moment has a pillbox, a World War II era pillbox, in the middle of a housing, well, what you would call a housing subdivision, what we call a housing estate over here in the UK, right in the middle, literally right in the middle. They haven't demolished it; it's there. They built around it. So I don't know. I know a lot. I live near a lot of RAF World War II era airfields, and there's a lot of World War II military installations that are still used today. Some are now civilian use. Others are still military occupied. I've got the Royal Military Academy 5 miles down the road from me. The old RAF Staff College used to be down the road from where my uncle lived. The building is now awaiting demolition. It was moved. There's a former military base where the Royal Electrical Mechanical Engineers, the REME, which is sort of like an engineering unit, has now moved, and that is now residential housing. The whole military base is completely gone. There's a couple of old military buildings still standing. There's military, but I used to work in an area where I used to work for the Ministry of Defence as a civilian contractor, so I've been on military base. There's a fair amount of military activity around where I live. I haven't found anything interesting yet. You will come across live ordnance in certain areas near where I live because not only are they used by the public, so you and I, for example, if you were to come over here on holiday, you could go hiking or walking or walking in the woods, and certain areas you will find training ordnance, so grenades. You will find bullets. You will find shell casings. Uh, there is local bylaws, and where I used to work at my old depot a couple of years ago, and my waste collection round was for the gardening waste. So people, hedge trimmings, lawn mowing, they pay for a subscription and we collect the waste. My driver was like, "What does that sign mean?" I said, "It's a military bylaw." Every Even in the US, you have military districts for defence. You may not know about them as a civilian, but the military will subdivide the US, for example, into defence sectors, where there'll be a command base, and then the other military postings in a certain district will come under a military district. It's the same in Russia. It's the same over here. It's the same in any country that has a military. They'll have defence zones and military districts, and we come under the Aldershot military district, or used to. Vast areas of where I live in the county of Berkshire, which is a political subdivision, which is broken down into 6 subdivisions of itself politically. Hampshire and Surrey, which are the traditional counties. You would have counties, obviously, in the US and your various states, or parishes in Louisiana, or boroughs in Alaska. I know my stuff. Um, they're broken down into military districts. Each military does it differently. Um, there are former training areas, which some are still owned by the Ministry of Defence, some have now been sold on, and they're still finding live ordnance. That we had, I think, a year or two ago, they found a World War II bomb near where a friend of mine lives by the River Thames, in a field in a golf course, that had been aimed at one of the RAF bases, obviously in World War II during the Battle of Britain. German bombers dropped its load of bombs, and they found a live one that didn't go off. The fuse obviously was faulty, which happens you're mass producing armaments. Not all the fuses go off on aircraft, aerial bombs, and on massive shells. The fuses fail, and they found a live one, and the military, the bomb squad had to come out, had to secure the area and blow it up. Quite a large explosion, which you could hear from some distance away. In regards to bunkers, I've found some very interesting ones in my travels, in my spare time, and with the job I'm doing. There's a lot of machine gun pillboxes, because they were in 1939 and 1940, when World War II first started. Pillboxes were springing up around major road junctions across the UK. I found at least 5 around where I live. You can still see remnants of air raid shelters and military bunkers lying about. Have I found any artifacts? I've not found any artifacts per se. I found structures, and I'm more than happy to, if I can, in the woods. There's bits and pieces. You can tell there was definitely military activity in the woods nearby, just by looking at the amount of brick and concrete lying in the ground that's broken up, and that is what I always find very, very interesting, is when you find, like, brick and concrete. Concrete is generally a commercial or military use before 1945. Not many houses were made of concrete. You can tell by architectural styles, and the older buildings around where I live, concrete wasn't used before 1945 in residential housing. So when I'm finding bits of concrete and bits of brick in the woods near me, there's never been, as far as I'm aware, since 1919, any houses in there, because it's been Forestry Commission, and therefore it's technically owned by the government. And so it wouldn't surprise me if there are air raid shelters and bunkers in the woods, which would be either that way from my flat, to the east of where I live, to the east. In regards to I'm looking at the chat also on my phone as well because it helps, because sometimes it's a little bit quicker on my phone than on my laptop. Uh, in regards to how am I doing, I'm doing okay. But it is an interesting question. How many World War II bunkers are there? My old school had a couple of air raid shelters, which we could see bits of that I think have degraded even more now. Um, this area, there was a lot of military activity. We have there's an old military base that's gone now. I would think about 4 miles from where I live, just to the west of me, which is in sort of that direction is west. There's a couple of RAF airfields nearby, which have been obviously transferred over to civilian use, or have been the land's been sold on. So if you were to metal detect, for example, you would probably find World War II bomb fragments, artillery, anti-aircraft artillery positions. You'll probably find the placements. Um, if you were to metal detect and do a geophysics survey or do a field walk, if the field's been ploughed, you may see in the plough soil bits of metal. Most likely, might find belt buckles, cap badges, shell casings from anti-aircraft positions. You do find them uh, in in um, in fields, uh, and that in itself is exceptionally interesting. Um, the the It's an interesting thing talking about. Like, I found the remains of a military bunker in the woods near my mother's house. There are videos of that military bunker on this channel. I did find it's a rather large, sunken. Tell it's a bunker by the way the land is flat and suddenly it drops down into a very large rectangular formation. Um, I think after the war it was probably used as a barn or a storage facility by the farmer who had the land at that point. The land has since been bought by the local authority, the local government, as a nature reserve. But looking at the concrete, it looks prefab, prefabricated, which is a military way of quickly building installations quickly. And before 1945, not all farms had the money to have concrete, uh, especially during the Depression, to have concrete buildings put in place. Barns were made of wood, but brick. Um, so to have concrete and that size of concrete, which is reinforced with steel, and there's some big chunks. I mean, some of these blocks are about this big. Um, would say to me that at some point there was a military bunker. You can definitely see the layout of a building, a foundation. It's quite deep. And I do know that there was the US military were there from early 1942 till 1945 with their local headquarters in the preparation for D-Day. Also in this area of the Thames Valley where I live in, the 101st and 82nd Airborne would do practice parachute drops. The infantry divisions would do mock training battles um, in the countryside to simulate the countryside in northern France with small fields, country lanes, hedgerows. So if you watch like Band of Brothers or you watch Saving Private Ryan, the first episode, they're obviously doing their training. Um, Again, very. There's a lot of woods around here. There's a lot of training areas. My dad was in the army. We did similar training exercises, both with blanks and live fire, which you do regularly in the military. I've got a lot of friends in the military. They do a lot of these training exercises where they are in rural areas where they will mock up a fake village, um, or they might have. And in some areas, they've actually bought huge tracts of land that include villages that had to be. The owners had their houses bought and were told never to come back. So in parts of southwest England, there are, I think, 3 or 4 villages that have been occupied by the British Armed Forces since 1939, and the residents have never been, the families have never been allowed to return to their homes. They've been rehoused. They were compensated, obviously, but they're not allowed to return because it's still MOD land, and they use these settlements to basically practice urban warfare. That's really interesting. I've come across a few ex-military bunkers. Um, there's a lot of links to the RAF and the army in the area that I live. I've got friends who live in Portsmouth, which is the home of the British Navy, um, and uh, and Plymouth is the home of the Royal Marines. I've got friends who live down in the West Country and family that live in the southwest of England. So we have a strong link with my family and my friends to the British Armed Forces, um, which in itself is very very interesting. Have I what kind of artifacts have I found? Um, as I say, I've just found structures or remains of structures. I do know that there is also somewhere just to the south of me. There's some woodland and then some farmland, and there's a public path that skirts between the woodland and the farmland. There's a farm on your right, woods to the left. And looking at the lumps and bumps and the lay of the land, you can tell that there were buildings there a long time ago, and the path has been repaired by using demolition rubble from an old house. And we're talking very old brick. By looking at how the coloration, really red brick, that 16th to 18th century. So whatever building was there was a good 200 years ago. Might have been a 200-year-old building. Has definitely been pulled down, and the rubble has been used to shore up the path over many many years by the landowners. And you can definitely tell that there was definitely building or buildings standing at some point that have been demolished by looking at the lumps and bumps in the ground. So that's really interesting. I always find really interesting stuff. And when you're finding chunks of brick about that big in the ground, and then you look at the house names and bits and pieces um, in the land. I mean, there's a man-made mill site, a mill course and a mill lake and a mill stream. Now, the mill stream is long since just now a drainage ditch, but there is still a little mill pond, and they believe that iron working was taking place, um, and they were using the water to pump the bellows, to then pump the air into the forge to make iron, be it tools or weapons. And that is about a mile and a half that way. There's also a place called Finchampstead Ridges, which has got strong links to the Tudor royal family house of Henry VIII. And it is rumoured and reported that Henry VII, the Prince of Wales at the time, which was Prince Arthur, Henry VIII's older brother, and Henry VIII himself, when he was a junior prince, met Catherine of Aragon for the first time, literally in the same ridgeland woodland area where this little mill pond is. So that is quite regularly reported in the records. Catherine of Aragon herself, following during her divorce proceedings, and then her later life, was actually imprisoned 5 miles that way. And I've been to the property that she was actually imprisoned at. The poet Alexander Pope, the writer, the painter, he lived just up the road from here as well, about 5 miles away. So there's some very, very interesting bits and pieces historically that I've done videos on nearby, and I'm more than happy to do more in regards to local history content of where I live. The road layout where I live was laid out under George III for military and hunting purposes. Why does the southwest UK consume the most cannabis out of any other UK region? Cornwall is known for the surfing culture. There's a lot of surfers. Um, that is a very interesting question. I can't answer that. Drug use is, well, I obviously have my theory that I think it should be legalized and regulated. If alcohol and tobacco were discovered today, they would be automatically Scheduled 1 in the US and Class A in the UK. They would automatically be on the highest scheduling for criminality and controlled substances if they were discovered today. Just putting that out there because of the health aspects in regards to deaths related to alcohol, deaths related to tobacco use. I can't tell you why. Um, there's also a big issue with heroin in the southwest of the UK. In fact, most coastal towns in the UK have an issue with hard drug use. Um, I can't tell you why that is. There's a lot of deprivation. The southwest of the UK, so Cornwall and Devon, when it comes to average salary, job prospects, um, social mobility, um, Cornwall is the poorest um, county in the whole of the UK. Lowest average salary, highest unemployment rates, lowest investment. It's one of, I think, three counties in England that doesn't have a link to the motorway network. I think Lincolnshire and Suffolk. No, four counties. Suffolk, Norfolk, and Cornwall are, I think, the three counties, and Rutland, that don't have any motorway links. So what you would call highways. Um, they don't have a primary motorway link, so highways. So that in itself is really interesting. These are areas that you know have extensive coastlines and a lot of coastal settlements where a large proportion of the population of these areas live in. Cornwall is famous for obviously the town of Newquay, which is the surfing capital of the UK. A lot of surfers go down there. It's our version of Hawaii, basically, or Bora Bora. You get some pretty big waves off the Cornish coast, and that's famous for its cannabis problem. Well, if you want to call it a problem, I would say also the climate. People need to make money. If there's low opportunity for earning a decent salary, there's low opportunity for young people to get on the jobs ladder, get on the property ladder. Uh, Lack of opportunity, um, a lack of investment, lower average salaries. People are going to try and supplement their income, be it through legitimate means, having a second job, or illegitimate means through drug use and drug dealing. It's part and parcel of what happens when you have deprivation. Now, the homelessness problem in Cornwall isn't that bad. I'm going to put it out there. It's a low population, rural region of the UK. Is the West Country. There are some big towns and cities in Devon. Cornwall, there's no real big towns. There's one city in Cornwall, and it's tiny in comparison to your mainstream UK, what you would class as a city here in the UK. Obviously, in the US, to get city status, you just have to be incorporated as a city. You can have like 500 people living there, but it's classed as a city. The way the UK works is you've got to have a cathedral of either Catholic or Protestant denomination historically, and to be granted city status historically, would have to have an act of Parliament. Um, Southend is the newest city to be granted that status. Um, Truro is a city of about, I think, 19,000 people. Truro is a city about nine. It's not the smallest city. St David's in Wales is smaller, but in Pembrokeshire. But it's the biggest. Penzance and Truro and Falmouth are the biggest, and Newquay are the biggest settlements in Cornwall. They're not very big. They're really not very big. There's poor infrastructure in regards to the road network, the rail network, so public transportation. It's very rural, and yeah, there's no real large settlements. Agricultural economy, heavily reliant on tourism. Of course, the COVID pandemic has smashed Devon and Cornwall. So I feel sorry for those people who work in the service sector in Cornwall. I've got one of my cousins lives on the north coast of Cornwall in a place called Bude, which is near Devon as well. It's sort of on the border. A very small seaside town. Yeah. Uh, I wouldn't say I've lived um, I've basically been on the edge of urbanisation in my kind of neck of the woods. The most busy I got was living alongside the A4 for 6 months. Um, but for the most part, I've lived on the edge of where I live in Berkshire. I've obviously moved, but I'm on the edge of Wokingham. I was on the edge of Bracknell. They're basically in the M4 corridor, M3 corridors. there's a lot of housing development taking place right now where I live. So new housing subdivisions are popping up all over the place. But where I'm living right now is right on the edge of I'm in proper leafy suburb, kind of more the not quite rural, but not quite urban. I'm sort of right on the edge of the town. I still live on a major A road. It's just not as busy as the other major A road that goes. I'm on the A321, which is a link A road between Oxfordshire and Hampshire, Surrey. So it's not the busiest road per se. Um, it's not as busy as the A4. Um, well, I don't. I've got a friend who I've got a good friend who lives in Exeter. Two good friends who actually live in Exeter. One I've visited since he's been down there. One I haven't, but I've been to Exeter. I've got family in Dorset, in the Dorchester area. I've got family in the Somerset area around Taunton, which is a major town, obviously on the M5. I've got family in Cornwall. I've got family in Bedford, just outside Bedford. I've got family in London. I've been to London a lot. I've got friends and family around the Greater London area. So I've been to London a lot when I was younger. I've got friends who live there. I've got family who live there. So yeah, I've been to London a lot. London doesn't bother me to visit, but I wouldn't want to live there. Wouldn't want to live there. My dad used to live just south of Birmingham, so I used to go to Birmingham a lot as well when I was younger. Again, I've worked in Birmingham as well on a contract. Uh, didn't enjoy Birmingham anywhere near as much as I enjoy London for a day out. Did not enjoy it. I don't mind London. I've never been lost in. I wouldn't say it's the worst place. I would rank Birmingham a lot higher. But I've been to Liverpool. I've got friends in Liverpool as well, and Manchester up north. I've got friends in Sunderland and Newcastle. I've actually got a friend who lives in the outer it's in the Hebrides now, and she loves it up there. She's from there originally, Kaylee. She moved back a couple of years ago just before the pandemic. She hasn't looked back. The pace of life is far more relaxed. Um, she's far happier. I, I I would think my worst experience was Birmingham. Um, close second was I would say, God, I would say Havant is my second, and Waterlooville would be my second worst experience. Would be Havant and Waterlooville. This is what happens when you go to a military, a town or a city that's got heavy links to the military. Is you'll find more crime in those locations. And yeah, I used to live. I spent a while living in Borden with my sister. Borden, ex-military town now, was a military town at the time. Not a lot to do, really. It was a small military town. It was a small military base that was linked to the Arborfield garrison, which is ironically just down the road from where I live, and that's gone now. And they were winding down at the time. There were still major important military garrisons. Now they don't exist anymore. In the years my sister was living there, on the civilian side of things, they had shrunk the size of the base. Now the base is completely gone. Um, I don't mind having a thriving melting pot of people. I like seeing other cultures and meeting people from around. I've got friends from all around the world, all around Europe, all around the world. I love it. I've got friends from Africa, Europe, Asia, Australia, New Zealand, South America. I've got friends from every continent. That I really don't mind. What I do mind is the deprivation. In the 21st century, we should not be relying on food banks. No child should be in poverty, and unemployment shouldn't be at the level it's at. Most famous historical figure. Oh Christ! Good God! I've met Prince Edward. I've met Prince Harry. I've met Princess Anne. I've met the Queen. I met oh God. I've met the Russian oil minister from '94. God knows what his name is. I'll have to research who was the oil minister of the Russian Federation in 1994. Um, I've met Michael Jackson. Yeah, Michael Jackson, Christ. Right, guy there. Um, I've met Barry McGuigan, a former boxer. I've met Freddie Flintoff, who's a former cricketer and TV presenter. I've met Ross Kemp, actor and TV presenter and freelance journalist. I've met several members of Parliament. Not that they're very interesting, really. I've met Ian Duncan Smith, who was former Conservative Party leader, member of the cabinet. I've met Boris Johnson before he was important. Yep, met Boris Johnson in Henley-on-Thames when he was MP of Henley-on-Thames. Yeah, I met Gary Lineker, former England international. I've met some interesting people. I've met a lot of comedians because I used to work in a comedy club. And some of these comedians you wouldn't know being from the US, but I've met a lot of comedians. I've met the cast of Harry Potter from the first two films. So I've met Alan Rickman, Professor Snape. Yep, met him. I've met Brian Blessed because I used to do his bins. I met Brian May from Queen and Anita Dobson, his wife. So in my job that I do, I've met some famous people. I met Steve Ryder. He's a sports commentator and TV presenter for ITV, and I think it's Sky. I think it's Sky he now works for. I think he does the British Touring Car Championship. He's been on the TV for like 30, 40 years. I've met a couple of British touring car drivers, again by accident because they have other business interests. Who else have I've met quite a few sports personalities in my time. I met a couple of players and managers. My dad's best friend, Terry Seymour, used to play for Watford and Reading. And last time I saw him, I was about 10 years old. He was best mates with my dad, which is weird. But no, I've met some very, very interesting people. I've met the King of Holland when he was Crown Prince of Holland. I've met royalty, literally been face to face with royalty. Yeah, I've met some interesting people. I've met Sir Christopher Lee. So if you've watched Star Wars or if you've watched the original Three Musketeers trilogy, I've met Sir Christopher Lee. Very interesting chap, Christopher Lee. Very interesting chap. Lord Count Dooku, the Sith Lord. Very, very interesting. He had a very interesting military career in the RAF. He was a flight sergeant, and he was then moved to the intelligence photographic division because he was far too intelligent to be flying around up there. You see, you're more useful on the ground. That was his commanding officer, Flight Sergeant Lee, could come over. He was quite interesting. Adam Rickman. The best way to act is not to move your teeth. I've met Brian Blessed. Gordon's alive. Don't be frightened. Yeah, I met Brian Blessed, the oldest guy to climb the highest altitude unaided without oxygen. He's a very interesting chap. He's completely batshit crazy, but he's interesting. I'm trying to think. I've met quite a lot of. I've met Bruce Forsyth. I went to school with his son. I've met Will Carling, the former England rugby union captain. He's an absolute tosser. No, not joking. He is an absolute tosser. I've met Sir Clive Woodward, former England and Lions rugby union coach. Brain's gone a bit. I've had a bit of brain fade. A guy I went to school with, Max Laheath, is currently playing for the Bristol Bears in the English Rugby Union. Former of London Irish, former of Bath, former of the Melbourne Rebels in Australian Super Rugby. Went to school with him. I went to school with the guy who was in Stormbreaker, Alex Pettifer. He's a knob. Christian Lewis Pratt, former England Sevens player, went to school with him. He's a knob. These are my personal opinions of these people. Other people may see them differently. I didn't get on with these people at school, so that's my most interesting chat with. I think Barry McGuigan came up with the funniest funniest one-liner. But Tony Law, the Canadian comedian, actually incorporated something that happened to me in real life in his act that same night I was working at the comedy club, and he bought me 5 pints of super strength lager, and I got rather drunk. Thank you, Tony Law. Um, he's a very funny Canadian comedian. He lives over here. He's a British Canadian comedian. He's really funny. Very underrated. Not necessarily the biggest name in comedy, but he's quite funny. Um, Most interesting chat. Never. I think I've met Ben Cohen, former England, and Steve Thompson, former England rugby union players, and Jason Leonard. I don't really have a lot to read. They're just normal people. I've met David Williams. I've met Ice Cube, Ollie Murs. Um, Quite honestly, unless you're like backstage with them and you've been given like a pass to go backstage when you're like in the audience of some of their live events, or you just meet them when they shake hands with the audience, go around and say a few bits and pieces. They're not. I'm not starstruck with these people. I'm like, okay, that's Ice Cube. Because because of the jobs that I've done, you become a little bit. How do I put it? You become a little bit. Eh. They're just normal. You got to treat them as normal people. Who would I like to have? I mean, Alan Rickman, I think, was the most interesting one when I did my Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves impersonation of the Sheriff of Nottingham. And he went, "The best way to act is not to move your teeth." Alan Rickman was the best one. He was quite funny. I remember it even now. I went to school with his nephew. Basically, um, Loxley, I'm going to cut your heart out with a spoon. And of course, the guy who plays Guy of Gisborne, his cousin, goes, "Cousin, why a spoon? Why not an axe?" "You are dull, Gibson, because it will hurt more." I do a very good Alan Rickman, but I think he was the funniest because I did an impersonation of him, and he actually found it quite funny. And he was like, "The best way to act is not to move your teeth." And he was like, "That's far too good." uh, no, yeah, it's very common here. There's a lot of Halloween decorations. It's becoming more common here. I mean, I used to go trick or treating as a kid. I stopped going trick or treating when I was about 12 years old because I obviously had younger stepbrothers. My younger brother is just under 13 years younger than me. There's a big age difference. Um, and Yeah, so I have two younger stepbrothers. We took them out once or twice. I stopped going, yeah, before I was 12 years old. Really, um, Halloween is not something that we overly, do in our family. I've been to a few Halloween parties, a few fancy dress parties in my time. I have done that. I have been to some fancy dress parties as an adult, just for giggles. One of my friends did go dressed as an SS officer, and even now, I look at those old photos and I cringe. And I'm like, "Adam, why are you dressed wearing wearing that?" It's not a good look on social media. I thankfully deleted that social media account. He hasn't. Those photos are still in the public domain. It's becoming more popular here. We've already got the Christmas adverts out over here, which I don't like. It's not even Halloween's tomorrow. It is celebrated. It's becoming more popular in recent years. I've noticed. Um, I didn't really pay much attention. All I knew was it's All Hallows Eve. It's to do with the old pagan autumn harvest festival. When obviously the seasons change, the old pagan festivals, which is how all the Abrahamic Judaism, Christianity, and Islam are based. A lot of their holy holidays are actually based off pagan rituals when they assimilated local cultures to keep the locals from rebelling all the time when they converted them to the one faith, which is actually three different sects of the Abrahamic teachings. So All Hallows Eve is tomorrow. It generally coincides with what is, in the Christian churches, harvest festivals. And if you were to come to Europe, or every European country, if you go to the villages, traditionally there's harvest festivals between September and October where they have various harvest festivals where there's there's like markets and certain fruits and vegetables are sold like pumpkins, ironically. And in pagan religions, there would be a lot of drinking, obviously, and it's the same with Christmas. Actually, the winter solstice takes place on the 21st of December. Christmas Day is on the 25th. That was a pagan festival for the shortest day of the year. For whatever reason, the Christian Church decided to put it 4 days later. Who knows why? Obviously, fireworks night over here, Guy Fawkes night, is something that we celebrate. It's like your 4th of July. It's our thing in November. It's to celebrate the fact that he didn't blow up the Houses of Parliament, and that his co-conspirators were all. There's a big on Embankment Tube Station. There's a big Guy Fawkes. It's got all the plotters of the gunpowder plot. There's a very famous engraving that was done shortly after, um, and this is at a time of the wars of religion. And I think it's either at Charing Cross or Embankment Tube Station. There's a big mural on the wall on platform one of the gunpowder plot engraving, and it's got all the conspirators. There's one guy though who just goes by the name of Bates. Every other one, like the Gadsbys and Guy Fawkes, and these were very influential Protestant dissenters and Catholics who were not happy with the state of play under James the First, or James the Fifth, or James the Sixth of Scotland, I think. James the first Stuart King of England. They weren't happy with some of his religious policies and political policies at that time, so they decided to try and blow him up. Yes, blow him up. Because there were other claimants to the throne who were either Catholic or of a different Protestant dissenting, and there was a lot of the full ins and outs. Was it funded by the Spanish crown of Philip II and his descendants, because there was still tension between England and Spain over the Spanish Armada? There was conflict in the Low Countries, which is now Belgium, Holland, and Luxembourg, where the Spanish monarchy, the Dutch were fighting a rebellion, and the French. Various players were at play in Europe at the time. And so your 4th of July, which is Independence Day, fireworks night would be our equivalent, which is, oh, bugger, that king wasn't assassinated. Who knew? So that is an important moment that we are taught about in school. So from Halloween, then you got fireworks night, and then of course you have Remembrance Day on the 11th of November. This period, 3 very important events take place in our social kind of thing. Halloween, I think, I don't know how popular it is over in Europe, but it's becoming more popular here. But ironically, if you are quite religious, All Hallows Eve is a Saint's Day. So if you are quite religiously inclined, you may go to church on this night and have a religious festival, an actual religious service. The Americans have obviously turned it from a religious, when the early settlers went over to Jamestown and Virginia colony and Massachusetts and Maryland, and subdivided, what is the original 13 colonies and then what became the United States, have turned a religious festival into a commercial festival, basically a day of parties and candy and horror films, a lot of horror films, and a horror genre. It's gone from a religious festival into this like day of the year, where it's mostly for kids really, and then fancy dress parties and all that, where adults dress up like idiots as well, and generally a day of fun. But it's actually based upon originally a pagan festival to do with the harvest festival, which is why the pumpkins are there, as carving the pumpkin, because it was a religious harvest festival, All Hallows Eve. Same with Easter, with Whitsun and things like that. Easter's now become very commercialized. So if you are like a religious person, with that in mind, things like Easter and Christmas, Halloween, not really the most important religious date in the Christian calendar, anyway. But the solstice are the winter and summer solstice. So basically Easter and Christmas. Who knew? Pagan festivals have become religious modern-day Christian festivals. Who knew? Hanukkah is just because some guy couldn't count the waxing and waning of the moon. So there was a dyslexic or dyscalculate person trying to work out when Hanukkah takes place, because that varies from year to year. Easter again varies from year to year, the date it falls on. I think there's a 3-week period where Easter can fall. Christmas stays on the same day though. But who knew that the two, average day where it's 6 and 6, where you have 12 hours of daylight, 12 hours of darkness, would the solstices, so Easter and Halloween. Who knew they would be based upon that? It's just the other end of the year to Easter. Basically, is Halloween. So Easter is the spring festival where you plant your crops for the summer. You know, your livestock give birth, so obviously you'll have uh, you know you'll be using up your supplies that you've stored for the winter. You'll have a big meal, and then you fast, and then you break that fast with another big meal. So you make sure your that's why you have that fasting period, is to make sure your grain survives the next 40 days, and you are basically on your last bits of supplies you've kept hoarded over the winter, if you've got any, to then break that with another big feast and a piss up, and that's called Easter. It's amazing, that isn't it? That all the modern Christian festivals are based upon paganism. Same with Eid and Ramadan in the Islamic faith. Passover, that's basically Jewish Easter. Hanukkah's Jewish Christmas. Who knew? Um, who knew that it's weird. Um, but yeah, no, Halloween is commonplace. It, 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 it is commonplace. I think it's I think it's become more popular in the last 20 or 30 years. I don't think it was popular before the 1980s over here. I don't know how popular it was in the US and Canada before the 80s, but it's definitely, I don't know how popular it is in mainland Europe. I'll be interested to see, how popular it is. Um, but when I've been over in mainland Europe, it's been a long time since I've been in mainland Europe. It doesn't appear to be popular, really. It depends. I suppose it depends where. I think Germany is quite popular, but I don't think it's overly popular in other parts of Europe. I think it's more of an Anglo-Saxon kind of English speaking um, kind of kind of um, event. So I think it is quite popular in Australia and New Zealand. It's quite popular in Canada. It's quite popular here. I'm not sure how popular it is in Ireland though. I've never really thought about how popular Halloween is over in Ireland, but Ireland's predominantly Catholic as the majority denomination, and I think All Hallows Eve is um, more of a Protestant Christian kind of religious day traditionally. So yeah, I don't know how popular it is in Catholic communities and in Ireland. I wouldn't know. Obviously, the US is different. You've got almost every church denomination you can think of. Um, but I'll have to see the history of Halloween. I'll have to check up on it, because I am interested in the origins. I know that it's All Hallows Eve. Um, I know there's a religious aspect to it. Yeah. What is Halloween Day? Halloween means Holy Evening or All Saints Day. So All Hallows Eve, basically. Halloween originates from an ancient Celtic festival called Samhain, which is basically the harvest festival. That's basically what it is. That's basically what it is. Um, that is, yeah, I was right. Why is Halloween scary? Halloween is inspired by the night before, which was known as All Hallows Eve, which was yesterday, which is the 30th of October. It was said that the line between our world and the afterlife was especially thin around All Hallows Eve. Again, Harvest Festival, the things are starting to die back. Autumn has started, or fall in the US and Canada. So yeah, it's just the end of summer. It's the traditional end of summer, but obviously they, under the Christian calendar, for whatever reason, it coincides with the harvest, so they do it in October. even though the equinox was like a week ago. Yeah, it is what it is. Yeah, so it's All Hallows Eve tonight and Halloween's tomorrow. Crikey, there's even sex stuff for Halloween. Right, let's have a read. Let's have a read about Halloween, shall we? While we're here, Halloween or All Hallows Evening, All Hallows Eve or All Saints Eve is a celebration observed by many countries actually on the 31st of October, the eve of the Western Christian feast of All Hallows Day, which is the 1st of November. So I knew it was All Hallows or All Saints Eve. Um, yeah, it's apparently dedicated to remembering the dead, including saints, martyrs, and all the departed. So yeah, it is a spiritual festival to do with the Harvest Festival. Um, yeah, celebration, trick or treating, costume parties, jack o' lanterns. So that's the pumpkin heads now. Bonfires, apple bobbing, haunted attractions. There's church services, there is prayer, there is fasting, and there is a vigil. Um, one theory holds that many Halloween traditions were influenced by Celtic harvest festivals. Um, All Hallows Day. All right. Yeah, it's an interesting one. There are, yeah, people will attend church services and lighting candles on the graves of their dead relatives. It's secular mostly now, and it is classed as a fasting day for many Christians who will abstain from eating meat on All Hallows Eve. Um, Potato pancakes. So yeah, that's aspect behind Halloween, but it has become so commercialized as with all the festive holidays like Christmas and Hanukkah, and that's called the festive period, the holiday season. This is the start of the holiday season, um, as the Americans would see it. I'm not a big fan of. I mean, there's already Christmas adverts on the TV. I'm not a massive fan of that. I'm really not. I'm really not a massive fan um, of the commercialization. I've never been really a fan of Christmas, to be honest. But I'm not a big fan of the commercialization of the time of year. It puts a lot of pressure on people financially, a lot of stress on people emotionally and financially. A lot of families actually have breakdown at this time of year. A lot of people get divorced in the aftermath of Christmas, New Year, Valentine. Anyway, from Halloween to Valentine's Day, the stress on families increases, and family breakdown. More people file for divorce in this period than in the summer. It's true. More people file for divorce between October and March, or Easter, March, April, than in the summer. Uh, be it in secular or religious, more people have family breakdown at this time of year, which is interesting. We were extremely. Let's have a look at some of the questions we've had. I'll take lower wages to live in a rural, well, I'll say rural location over a big town. Yeah, I can understand that. Quality of life is important. The speed of life is important. I found people who live in rural communities tend to be happier and less stressed, but a lot of them are either retired or commute, or work from home, or have a small business. I like rural areas better. I find them more relaxing, less stressful. There's a slower pace to life, which I find appealing. I think pace of life, quality of living, personal well-being is important. I think city life is far too hectic, and ironically, those who actually live in the cities, um, I think life expectancy is lower in inner city areas than in suburbia, and then in the rural areas, health seems to be better. It's a trend there. Urbanisation doesn't necessarily breed good living. I don't know how true that is in the US. Obviously, the access to healthcare is important and education. and some rural communities do have, especially even in the Western world, even in developed countries, have issues with access to healthcare, and healthcare facilities having to cover a wider geographical area. So you're further from your nearest hospital. Um, but generally speaking, rural areas seem to have better quality of life, um, in the sense of, people seem to live healthier in rural areas. I wonder why that is. Or access to fresh food. Hmm. That's just an observation I've seen, from where I've in my working life, and when I've gone to big cities, I find that it's the pace of life is chronic. Um, there's too much going on. Air quality as well is a lot lower in urban areas. That's always been the case. Air quality. There's been Clean Air Acts and legislation around the world trying to improve air quality. Um, one thing we noticed about the pandemic is air quality did improve during the lockdowns. Air quality did massively improve in big urban areas, whereas before there was issues with smog, heavy pollutants in the air. Air quality massively improved around the world in major cities. And of course, there's big drives to improve air quality now and reduce air pollution, which has been a major issue, in urbanized areas for a long, long time. What has also been noticeable is more people have fallen ill during the pandemic, not just with COVID, but other illnesses are more common in urban areas than in rural areas. Um, in developed countries, and what has been noticed, life expectancy is lower in big urban areas, especially in the former industrial areas. Nothing's changed in 100 years, yeah, death rates, mortality rates, um, youth mortality rates, preventable diseases, even sexual health. So STIs are higher in urban areas than in rural areas, um, and they are higher in certain towns and cities. Drug use is higher. Deaths due to drug overdose are higher, and complications. Alcoholism seems to be more problematic, in urban areas over rural areas. Uh, Radicalization, so political radicalization and religious radicalization also appears to be higher in urban environments, than in rural environments, especially from what I've seen in the UK at least, and in Europe. Um, uh, so yeah, big urban areas seem to have more inequality as well, between the richest and the poorest, in the sense of access to services, healthcare, housing. There seems to be greater inequality in an urban area. Um, from the poorest in a town or a city and the wealthiest, there are clear divides in every town and city I've come across. Um, so where I live right now, some of the most expensive housing in the UK outside of London, but within half a mile to a mile, one of the poorest areas in regards to housing, ironically. Out of mind, so they say. And then a few miles down the road, you can see a definite change in the quality of housing. And when you get into Reading, which is one of the bigger urban areas in the area, the, oh, there's a definite marked divide between the wealthiest and the poorest. It's definitely there. Um, and it is very, very interesting. Um, the um, the inequality gap is there. Um, there are certain areas which I describe as what I call the arsehole of the world. And people always say to me, "Oh, the southeast of England is very wealthy, very affluent." True for an average, but then the gap between the richest and the poorest is also the biggest as well. And that's something that, um, is. a fact. The actual gap between the wealthiest and the poorest is very stark and very real. And what's going on with my phone? Um, and yeah, that is a known fact there. The yeah the issues um, with wealth inequality, uh, couldn't make it up. Yes, obviously the southeast outside of London is the wealthiest area outside of London in this country, but it is also the area with the biggest inequality um, in the UK. I don't know what it's like in the US because each state is different and each um, urban area is different. It's very hard to put on, what's the wealthiest, highest average earning salary. I think New York has got the highest average salary, but also the most expensive city to live in regards to, the UK. The cost of living is different. If I was to live in the north of England, what I'm paying for rent here would get me a 3 or 4 bedroom house for the same money. So it is more expensive to live where I live, which is a problem. I am strongly considering looking for employment opportunities away from the southeast and living opportunities away from where I live. Um, and I make no secret of that fact, that the cost of living where I live is extortionate. It is very, very expensive. It's it's something that I've noticed. I mean, I've had to move further west from where I used to live. I'm further west now, um, and average rental prices for what I'm renting here. I mean, I'm in a very cheap building because of what the building is. It's a reconverted care home, which has been turned into flats. So it's not brilliant. It's not bad. It itself was originally a house, I believe, so it's had multiple uses. Um, but you know, the cost of living, it's just rents alone or mortgage payments. I mean, yeah, for what I'm paying where I am now, for the equivalent up north, as I say, I could get a 3 bedroom house. I could get a 3 bedroom house, or 2 to 3 bedroom house, for the equivalent. Um, some places up north are actually quite. There are some affluent places up in the north of England where, okay, that isn't necessarily the case, but on an average, yeah, I could definitely um, be doing worse. Um, but then average salaries are lower. You know, cost of living is a bit lower. How long that continues, I don't know. Um, there, there's, you know, there is a need to rebalance the economy in the UK to a more balanced economy across the whole of the UK, and try and invest in the outlying areas economically, and with investment for infrastructure, which in turn will then impact the property prices, the average salaries, the you know costs of goods. But because rents are lower up north and property prices are lower up north, prices when you buy stuff is cheaper because it costs less for the retailer to pay on their rates and rents for their brick and mortars store or their wholesaler, and therefore they can sell the goods cheaper because they, are having to pay less to bring the stock in. Not on every item, but a lot of items. So your money goes further up north. Um, that's just fact. Um, but yeah, it is what it is. Getting loads of Facebook messages. Ah, a friend of mine's being really anal with me, really pain in the arse. Just not going to cooperate with what they're saying. But it's is anyone else having issues with Facebook Messenger, like delivering messages like an hour after the person sent them to you? Like, because I am, and that's really annoying. But I, because I've noticed that in recent weeks, is Facebook Messenger's been playing up. Of course, there was that massive Facebook outage with Instagram and Snapchat and all that. Oh, how we coped. Didn't bother me. I just I noticed my internet was struggling for a few days. I think obviously a lot of people just surged on the same servers. Um, but yeah, that is very interesting. But yeah, like really, really interesting how like slow the internet's being. But no, looking at oh god, what's this? What's going on? Um, I don't know what I'm trying to obviously like double check the chat on my phone as well. But yeah, just everything's been really really slow at the moment. Really slow with the internet. Don't know why. Something just Facebook's been really slow. But let's see if anything's happening on the news because obviously we've had the announcement obviously of this tax. This tax 15% corporate tax rate that's been pushed forward. Um, the thing is, it's going to take 2 years before that's implemented, which I think is ridiculous. But it takes time to bring in legislation to reform tax systems, and there will be resistance to tax system reform. So it's not going to happen overnight. Um, no, nothing really. Oh, Greta Thunberg, yeah, she's getting lots of hugs by activists in Glasgow. Um, there's lots of protests. That's just COVID's still a thing, and he's non-violent protests. Great. Fridays for Future, school strikes. Um, there's even religious groups. They're religious nutters. They deny like people the. There's some right tools there. But yeah, that's a thing. There's a few things popping up. Um, YouTube removed an occultist who influenced the murder of two sisters. This is interesting. An occultist who influenced the murder of two women has been removed from YouTube after a BBC investigation. Daniel Hussein, 19, killed Bibba Henry and Nicole Smallwood in Wembley in 2020, last summer. He was active on a forum run by EO Coating, whose writings have encouraged murder until Diaz for his arrest. He was jailed for life, got spent 35 years in prison. It's interesting. He had more than 85,000 followers on YouTube and thousands more on Facebook, which has already removed him from his platforms. Matthew Lawrence, the online forum which the killer was a member was run by the self-styled black magician Coating, who provided instructions for demonic pacts. The BBC showed parallels between its public instructions and the actions, including how to pack documents. Matthew Lawrence is his real name. He had convictions for drugs and weapon offences. Wow, that is and YouTube hasn't released a comment. That's interesting. The fact that that content was up there for as long as it was is ridiculous. Does the UK have big fish to fry? Teenager making films on deaf children, lifelong fight. Nothing really happening. No breaking news. There's growing calls for rich countries to airlift billions of vaccine supplies to poorer nations. Oh God, clip. Oh wow, some countries really are not doing very well at all when it comes to vaccinating their people. Oh dear, dearie me. That is not good. Some countries are not doing well at all. Africa's the worst, obviously. That's not very good. Let's have a look. Wow, I'm just looking at the vaccination rates. That's interesting. Yeah, but there's the. I don't know. I mean, is yeah. Well, the Queen's not been well. That's interesting in itself. Right, I'm gonna call it a stream because I've got to charge my phone and sort dinner out. But thank you for your questions and comments, and I will have some more videos for you very, very soon.